and welcome to episode 81 of the So Bet Punks podcast about meaning, transcendence, awe and spirituality with a little s. My name is Siobhan.
And I'm Dave. Yeah. And you greet us today on an auspicious occasion.
Ooh,
well, maybe not auspicious occasion, a strange day.
Oh, yeah.
A strange day, for we are about to go on a silent retreat for 10 days.
Oh, yeah.
Which we probably won't be talking about too much on this podcast. We'll see. Maybe it'll just come up. Who knows what we're going to be talking about, in fairness. How are you feeling about it? Oh, I should say it's a Vispan. I'm not going to say it right. Vipassana meditation retreat. It's a Buddhist business. And it is 10 days of silence. 10 days of only eating in the morning.
Yeah.
Various other things. Lots of meditation.
And not a lot of it. You say lots of other things. Not really. Not really much of anything else. Specifically, not a lot of anything. No reading, no writing, no talking, no engaging with anyone.
No. Or even looking in each other's eyes, I believe. We're both going to be on it, but we're going to be segregated. Mm-hmm. It's a gender segregated sort of an arrangement. So we won't be able to communicate in any way apart from across a crowded room.
Oh, but I'm going to be specifically looking at the floor because if I catch your eyes,
it'll be a disaster.
It'll be awful.
So we are about to go and do that. We will be covering the entire experience on the next episode of this podcast.
Diddly-doo.
So do tune in. But in the meantime, Siobhan, how are you feeling? You all right?
Yeah, I'm anxiously excited. Is that a better way of describing it?
Better than what?
Better than just nervous, panicked. No, I think I'm excited because it's it's a weird, hard thing to do, and I look forward to experiencing whatever I experience and coming out the other end, however I come out the other end. Things I'm nervous about. Very recently, it's become very apparent that I just talk to myself all the time. So it's not talking to other people that I'm worried about. It's just making any kind of noise. And this not eating after 12 thing, very worried about that. Because I am a gluttonous, hungry person. But that's the point, isn't it? And I think once you've spent a few days just sitting down doing absolutely nothing, that hunger should wear off. But we don't know. It's the unknown, and that's the scary and exciting thing about it all. How about you? How are you feeling?
I think today I'm all right. I think today I feel a little bit like that bit in Alan Partridge where he puts on a meditation, his own meditation tape. And after about 5 minutes, he starts having to close drawers and straighten his slippers up.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm at the closing drawers and straightening slippers up
point.
I woke up at 4 this morning thinking about all of the different things that I needed to do that are all just nothingy things that I could have done at any point over the last probably 3 months and could be done. Don't even need to be done, really. But I suddenly came to the conclusion that I had to do them all before we go, which I suppose again isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it does feel a little bit like straightening my slippers into right angles.
100%. This is how I feel before any trip or any planned event generally.
So I think that's how I always used to when I was younger. But you know that thing, I mean, this was definitely true of my parents, and I feel like this will be true of their parents. That thing, and just people generally, when you go on holiday and for 2 days before you just start arguing, everything's really stressful. Suddenly, stopping at the Little Chef becomes a huge deal. When we used to stop at the Little Chef on the way to holiday, my dad always used to re-clean all the knives with a napkin. And he he's a man who'd never washed up in his life, very much, and has never washed up in his life, never taken any interest in this sort of thing. But I remember, I didn't really realise it at the time, but looking back, it was whenever we were going on holiday, and our holidays were always pretty minor, but Butlins or Wales, and he would always furiously clean everyone's knives just the knives, not the forks. Didn't matter if the forks had been in an old lady's mouth and not washed up. Just the knives. He'd clean the knives.
Holiday OCD.
So, but anyway, it would have been a stress thing,
It's a stress
and I never
reaction.
thought of it at the time. I just thought that was just what Dad did.
Oh, it's holiday. Dad's going to clean knives.
Well, I didn't. I think I've only just put together the puzzle that it was when we were going on holiday, and it was all about stress.
Aww.
But yeah, so I think I'm at the point where I'm straightening my slippers
Cleaning
and cleaning the knives in Little Chef.
If only there were a little chef to clean the knives of, David.
Oh, tell me about
Stop it.
What a dream.
I know. And pancake days tomorrow, when Little Chef would be the place to go. Get crappy pancakes
Very
there.
good point. But of course, ironically, tomorrow, so we're recording this a little bit early, I should say, because by the time you're hearing this, we'll actually be on this retreat.
Mm-hmm.
But the day before we go on the retreat, we're going to see Biohazard Life of Agony.
Just to really go from one like fury of senses to a fasting of the senses. Let's heighten them, and then let's pretend they don't exist. It's going to be great.
It is.
It's going to be very good.
So so tune in next episode to find out how we got on, whether we went mad. It's personally, but it's actually, I mean, I don't know. It's funny. One of those funny things. I think everyone that I've told that we're going on this thing sort of has two reactions. Almost seems to just be like, oh right, like it's no big deal. Which is, I'm not trying to make it sound like a big deal, or like, oh my god,
what the fuck?
Are you going to be able to survive?
Yeah.
And it's normally when you tell them about the eating bit, not the silence bit.
Well, I don't know.
But I know a lot of introverts.
Yeah. I've had an awful lot of people exclaim to me, I could never do that. You could never do that. And my manager said, oh, that thing, it's called, Vipassana. Yeah, my friend went on it, cried every day. I was like, oh, sweet. And she stared me down and said, you talk so much. Yeah. How are you going to do it?
Well, we will see. I think in fairness, Siobhan, you... and I'm probably the only person that sees this, but I do remind you of it regularly. You are just whoever you're around. So therefore, if you're around people that talk a lot, i.e. when you go to CrossFit, or when you go to a acute psychiatric unit, or just a psychiatric unit in your case, then yes, you're loud. But if you're around people that are silent, you will be silent.
Yeah, no, I think I'm going to be all right.
You're well trained in that respect.
Well trained.
Well done, Mum and Dad.
Superficial as fuck. Nah, it's all good.
On that level,
not
that level, on that on that superficial level, tell us about what you've done to create a sense of the non-superficial in your life, as we always start the podcast with.
Little segue there. So it's another week where I don't feel like I've done anything all that intentional. I had to go back and look over my journal to try and even remember what the last weeks have been, because they've been really busy with activity, but I try my hardest not to write like, oh, I did this, I did that. I try my hard to write how I'm feeling, or at least something more leaning towards that rather than just this is what I've done. And something that came up over and over again in the last couple of weeks, and I think it's been coming up, I think I've talked about it a lot, and it's definitely come up months before, is about this need for like actual connection and actual friendships and real conversations. And that's what I've written mostly down in the last few weeks. So I guess what I've done is probably nothing very specific, but something I've noticed more, or at least I'm paying more attention to, is trying to be a bit more real, following on from that being superficial, being whatever I am around everyone else.
The antithesis of what you just said.
Yeah, but just trying to make a bit more of an effort to notice when things are happening that are real and appreciate them. And if things are superficial, noticing them as superficial and going, oh, well, that's nice, but I'm not gonna pay too much of my attention towards that, or at least not get too dwelling in that. And it's given me a bit of a pause for thought on like who my real connections are, and who I genuinely, even if it is small, that I genuinely appreciate that connection. A couple other things that have kind of spurred this on is I had an uncle pass away just over a week ago, and watching my family's communication over that has been pretty terrible. Bless their hearts. I was not taught to communicate very well, it turns out. And it's funny because as a kid, I definitely thought my whole family communicated extraordinarily well. It's only when you realise that there are other ways.
The dad's furiously cleaning the knives in Little Chef. Oh, shit, I've got trauma, haven't I?
Yeah, wait a second. And it's funny because, like, you know, you and I have had loads of conversations when we're doing our like couples conversations, or just trying to have more open and honest conversations about all sorts. And we bring up our childhoods over and over again because we read a lot of Alain de Botton books, and he's furiously reminding us that everything comes from childhood. He's very psychoanalytical. And we sit there and go, yeah, but no, we had good childhoods. It's been really wrong. And
I don't think I've ever said that.
no, you haven't quite. No. Well, no, but let's not go into yours. But I definitely have erred on the side of everything's good. And then you kind of pick things apart and go, well, things are good, but I guess that thing is, something to work on. And communication is definitely one. And kind of having real, honest, like kind of emotional conversations with people. It's definitely not something that I was taught. I always assumed that I had it. And I think my family still to this day assume what they have is that. And when they're faced with it, I think they struggle to see how it's weird. So my dad's had to deal with the passing of his brother. So it's just been nice to even you, bless, I was going to message him and you were like, just ring your dad. I'm like, of course I should ring my dad. And my dad's a bit like, oh, but I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But we end up having a conversation. It's really, really, really super nice. And it's just, I guess, spurred on what I was already feeling about these kind of real connections and real, just having actual conversations with people. So I've had a few this week that have been really meaningful to me. And I definitely, like I say, even the small passing ones, and I've been thinking about people that I see at the gym and, narrowing down what is superficial. And actually there's a few people there that I genuinely really care about and just making sure that I don't know, tell them that or feel that way when I'm talking to them. I don't know, just little things, just being a bit more aware of what real and what isn't real. And being okay with both, acknowledging the difference and making sure my attention and my emotion is put in the right place. That sounds like a psychopath answer, but I think I mean that really nicely.
I think it sounds like a psychopath
deciding
answer
where my emotion is. But you know what I mean? Like, I think...
No, concentrating on... When you feel emotional about something, concentrating on that is what you've described.
Yeah, and also making sure the superficial is seen as superficial, and that can be fine. Like, I think there's lots to be gained from just having very nice superficial conversations and connections with people. For example, social media, Instagram, all those sorts of things, making you feel like that, because it's more in your face and prevalent, you kind of attach, or I do anyway, you're much better at me and you've deleted everything. Like, you can easily attach meaning to that and oversee speaking to people who you actually care about rather than who's readily in your face. I think of this as ignoring the group chat and reaching out to someone that you haven't heard from in a while. We're kind of receivers of communication and not very good at reaching out anymore because there's so much communication being bombarded at us. Like, you can just open Instagram and before you know it, you've received lots of communication that's not real, but you might have been opening your phone to make a phone call to someone deliberately or text someone deliberately. But my attention is very quickly stolen by receiving information rather than being more deliberate in what you're using that communication for.
I mean, I think the norm,
reaching out to people.
But the norm has not become, I picked up my phone to ring somebody I care about. Look, there's Instagram. I've seen a few things. Yeah. The norm is just to receiving that information on a superficial and somewhat empty, in a superficial, somewhat empty way, is the norm. Definitely.
And
I mean, when you give it up, you suddenly realise how little information you get that isn't in that way. And being that information is superficial, you suddenly realise that most things that you receive are superficial.
Yeah.
And that's not aimed at any person. I think that's just the society. That's the norm.
Yeah, even with your good friends who you're like, I'm just receiving look at this funny picture, and it's like, how are you? Like, why don't we ask each other how we are rather than just send each other a silly message?
Well, because we are the silly message. That's the problem.
Ooh.
We've become so superficial.
Yeah.
As and I think this is as an animal, animal. We've become so incredibly superficial.
Yeah.
And been rewarded so much for superficiality over anything else. And our status is gained through superficial means.
Yeah.
If you try to ask someone how they are, that doesn't improve your status, which is what we're all fundamentally looking for, subconsciously. And so we've become the silly videos that we've got on our phones. At least with most people, I suppose. But then I think it's infected even real friendships.
Yeah,
it's definitely infected family relationships.
Yeah.
I mean, even my fucking 80-year-old dad gets his phone out halfway through a conversation and starts showing me some mildly racist joke that his mate sent him.
But well, yeah, and I think we can't always. Not very good at naming that or realizing it in the moment, but sometimes you just have this feeling of a bit emptiness, like this kind of
sometimes always.
No, well, yeah, but I guess you can.
You're faced with an empty world. How else are you going to feel?
But if you're just in it and just not plodding along with it, but being carried along with it, it's only when you stop and think.
The fact that you delude yourself into thinking that the superficial isn't superficial doesn't make it not superficial.
Yeah,
this is the problem. Ultimately, it all needs to be reviewed by your subconscious.
Yeah.
This is why everybody feels so empty and feels so lonely and feels so shit, because we may think we're having a lovely time watching a video of a cat roll over, and in some ways we are. But if your entire life is videos of cats rolling over, then your subconscious is going to punish you for that.
Yeah,
because it knows that you're not putting anything of any worth into it.
Yeah.
So if you just watch Netflix all day, then that's all you're giving your inner world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there we go. That was a long roundabout answer to what I've done, which is kind of nothing, but kind of looked out for things. But yeah, we're trying to avoid that empty feelings and find the real niceness in people. Anyway, David, what have you done in the last couple of weeks that has brought you a sense of meaning, transcendence, or spirituality, wonder, loveliness, anything?
Well, in order to stop the emptiness inside me, I've mostly been listening to the new Disturbed single, I Will Not Break.
Sake.
I think it's called I Will Not Break. It must be. That's what he says a lot. So we've actually done loads in the last couple of weeks, and to be honest, I'd prepared this one because I figured that you were going to... Because we've done quite a lot of things that I would say give us transcendence. Yeah. And I just assumed that you were at least going to pick one of them. So I thought, well, I'll err for something that you definitely won't say.
Well,
and then you went into your gratitude journal and all of a sudden come out with something new.
I thought the same.
But also I do think that probably a lot of the things that we've done over the last couple of weeks might end up getting brought up later on in the podcast, so I didn't want to start treading on feet there either, so I thought, let's go safe. So here's what happened. I was flicking around on YouTube, filling myself with emptiness in the exact way that I've just described, and I think automatically, I don't think I chose it, but I might have it's not impossible that I thought to myself, let's see what that's like. The new Disturbed song had just come up. I think it had only been available for an hour or something, so it hadn't been seen by many people. So I probably thought to myself, I'll be one of the first to see that. And I don't know if any of that's true. I really don't know how it happened, but it started playing. And I tell you what, I should preface this with the fact that, unlike probably almost everybody listening, I really don't know Disturbed very well. It was well beyond the point where I was listening to any sort of popular music when that ooh ah song got big. And so, which, by the way, is probably the only song people know. You say they're well known.
They're well known for that song.
Well, you say that, but I can only go by this is my entire information about Disturbed comes from. Well, actually, there's a second source, but mostly comes from the amount of YouTube plays they've had, and having gone through a few of their old songs, they're all like insane, 80 million views or something on new songs from 2 years ago. So they've definitely, and I think they still play. I think they played Wembley.
Oh God!
Not too long ago. So I think they've maintained a certain level of popularity
somehow.
But I have nothing to base this on. I don't know anything. I honestly don't know anything about them. I'm pretty sure I've said this to you before, that I think I ended up with one of their albums in about 2008 or something. And I'm not not really sure how, but maybe it was just, I don't know. It's a band I didn't know about, so I might have just bought it, maybe, but I don't even think I would have bought it anyway. I don't think I remember hating it. Anyway, I've rebought it on Discord, so we'll find out. But I just put this song on, and I mean it's majestic. I mean, it's a really good song, and I think anybody listening to it will no way be able to listen. Like, you'd already obviously have opinions about the Disturbed.
I mean, he knows his.
No, he makes more of a woof.
Yeah, but he does a woof in that song. After that, he does a.
There you go.
He does that exact noise.
He does something like
in
that.
This
yeah.
one.
I think it's slightly different.
It's offbeat. It's the only difference.
Anyway, I listened to it with completely innocent ears and thought, "Fuck me, that's a good song. It's got a huge chorus, nice riff, good riff. I don't mind the woofing. I quite like the woofing, to be honest." So I'd recommend it. I'd go and listen to it. But I did genuinely when it first came on, because I wasn't expecting anything from it. And the riff started, and I thought, this is quite a good riff. It's quite big. Yeah, it's quite heavy. Like, it's very produced, but it's pretty decent. And then the verse starts, and the verse is like, it's pretty good. It's all right. Yeah. It's not bad, that verse. That's all right. And then the chorus just comes out of nowhere, and I had a minute of just being like, whoa! I think Disturbed are my favourite band.
And in that minute, you've bought what I can see is a huge package that's just literally been delivered by the postman that I know is all of Disturbed's back catalogue from Discogs.
For the record, Siobhan, it was a post-woman. So, eggs on your face. Yeah, it's true. So we'll see. I'll probably hate them. I did go back and listen to a couple of other earlier songs. I didn't like them as much. But here's a tidbit, which I think is an important tidbit. One of their songs, again, not an old song, but from about 3 years ago or something, they just either rip off or it's a knowing nod to the band Fear. Yeah. There's a bit where he just goes into...
there's too many of us, there's too many of us, there's too many of us.
They just do it.
Yeah.
I can't believe that Disturbed have a foot in the early American hardcore scene. But maybe. We shall see.
Yeah. Maybe Fear and Disturbed are friends.
That would be nice. A little Leaving. Leaving's very old. He wasn't young when he was doing it, so I think they're still going, but I think he's 80 or something.
Anyway. Do you know what? I think he's another 5'3" camp as well.
He's not. He's a big man,
He's
Leaving.
a short little thing.
He's tough as nails.
He's tough as nails, as is all the other shorties. Danzig, would you fight him?
I'd cuddle him.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean he's tough.
Yao, David Yao, he's a shorty.
No one wants to punch David Yao.
Exactly, but you cuddle him.
I'd tell you who the only people. I mean, I'm not into violence, but the only people that I would punch is anybody that wanted to punch David Yao. That would just make you the worst psychopath.
Yeah, very true.
So we will move on to our main segment now, and I'm not really sure where this is going to go because there's quite a lot of different aspects that we could be talking about. So we're going to play this by ear a little bit. And it might even roll over a little bit into my discussion of Disturbed. But if we can make that happen, then you'll be impressed. Because what we're talking about is that we went to a philosophical debate.
We did.
Last week, or a few days ago, really. And the debate was between John Vervaeke.
Our mate. Well, I wish he was our mate.
Well, so John Vervaeke we've brought up a lot on this podcast, but more in passing than anything else. He's a Canadian cognitive scientist / philosopher.
He's a professor at the University of Toronto.
I believe so.
We watched his. He's got 50 hours of lectures on YouTube. I mean, he's a guy, but yeah, he did this lecture series called "Awakening from the Meaning Crisis" that we've watched most of. We stopped at about episode 40, 41 because it got very cognitive sciencey and that got a bit hard. But the first 20, 25 hours are all philosophy and very interesting. But yeah, he's a good guy. He's a good guy, and we reference him.
He's a great guy.
He's a great guy. I like him a lot.
And someone else who we've sort of brought up a bit, Elizabeth Oldfield, who wrote a book that I really liked and called Fully Alive. I've brought her up a bit. She is a Christian. She does a podcast called The Sacred, which isn't really a Christian podcast, I wouldn't say. She talks to people of all sorts of different backgrounds about the sacred, whatever that might mean to them. And that can be all sorts of things. Sometimes it's very religious people, but sometimes it's philosophers. Sometimes it's all sorts of people. And the debate was called Faith Will Solve the Meaning Crisis. And it happened at a place called the Unheard Club. Heard spelled H-E-R-D. And I don't know if I would describe it as a... how I've been describing the Unheard Club, and I'm not sure if this is entirely accurate, is as a sort of neoconservative YouTube channel.
Well,
is that a fair?
I think it is fair. I told someone about this at work, and they said, "Oh, I've been following that publication for some years because it's actually been an online publication for a lot longer than it's been a YouTube channel podcasty thing."
Yeah.
And yeah, they said, there's some, there's been some out there articles put on there quite often, and they give a lot of time to people whose opinions are quite difficult. Some things lean on the side of conspiratorial, but it's quite often kind of extreme political. Not extreme.
I think
extreme is far
it,
too harsh a word. But basically, given that our friendship groups or our kind of little bubbles are quite liberal and leftist, I guess this is giving the alternative voices to that a little bit of a platform, which sometimes is wonderful and sometimes is a little bit, maybe at odds with some of the beliefs that we're surrounded by a bit. But it's not to say, I don't know, you've described them before as slightly right of the centre.
I think maybe
sometimes
quite right of the centre. But the thing is, of course, if you describe someone as being right wing, then people immediately think far right wing. Quite understandably, that's what we've been trained to do, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, and a lot of people that we know would consider anybody, even right of centre, to be fascists.
Which is half of the issue. That's
something that we could discuss on this podcast or not. It depends. It depends where we're going to go with this, which we still haven't fully decided. But maybe it's worth bringing up that we seem to have ended up by pure chance recently. So something we didn't discuss. A few episodes ago, we discussed The Extinction of Experience, which was a book which was written by Christine Rosen. And I mentioned it, but we didn't really discuss it. That I read the book, loved the book. We listened to her on a couple of podcasts and interviews and things, and it was only sort of halfway through that process that she's just calmly said, "I'm very conservative" or something like that. And we didn't really discuss that very much. That was a bit of a shock. I hadn't read the book in that context or anything else. But it seems a little bit like this is following us around because. So, for example, this is why I thought that Disturbed might come into this. Once I started, so I went on, quickly Googled Disturbed, and the singer from Disturbed has come out with recently, apparently, with a lot of quite some alternative opinions about Gaza.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh fuck, I've done it again. Because so this gig that we're going to on Tuesday, we booked it because we love the band Biohazard. Biohazard are a fucking great band. We've seen them before. I've been listening to them since the 90s. But it's a dual headliner gig with Life of Agony. Well, Life of Agony I loved when I was a teenager, and I think they're a great band. Their singer, who was born a man, became a lady quite early on in the sort of mainstream coverage of trans issues. I think maybe 2004-ish or something. Anyway, he is a he again because he's detransitioned in the last year, which is what it is. But he has also started. He's come out very much with sort of an anti-trans kind of agenda. One of them we did choose. We did go and see Pantera a few days ago, which I hold my hands up for, and that just is what it is. And again, we can talk about this a little bit. I made a decision that was fine, and some other people would not think that was fine. But even then, even though I have an argument against whether or not you should go and see Pantera, I don't have an argument about the fact that Power Trip, the band who supported them, also have recently come out with a load of comments about Gaza, which are somewhat alternative. Apparently, anyway, these are all rumours. So, by the way, I've not looked into it. Well, no, some of them aren't rumours, but this one is just that somebody told me that.
Okay.
So that might not entirely be true. But my point is it just seems like every fucking door I knock on, or we knock on, we suddenly find ourselves on a sort of alternative side of the political spectrum to the one that we're on. And so it should be said, to go back to this debate, not in any way is this a political debate.
No.
And this has nothing, and neither are these two people in any way controversial politically.
No, not at all. In fact, you wouldn't even be able to hazard a guess at what their political leanings are because they so don't discuss that or even kind of enter into that world. I would say John Vervaeke specifically not.
John Vervaeke very
he's
much
in,
not.
Like
yeah.
educational institution, and there's a lot of discussion about whether politics should be entering that. He's firmly on the it shouldn't, and you couldn't even guess what his political leanings were.
Absolutely. And Elizabeth Oldfield, her politics, certainly from the book, I would say, are very much in keeping with things that we would be on side with. But her podcast, I will say, she has I don't know exactly how it's worded, but she basically says she talks to people of all different political outlooks. So I think that probably if you scrolled through there'd be a bunch of people that maybe you wouldn't agree with, but no one extreme, I don't think. But but then it depends, because again, I think in the eyes of us, in comparison to the eyes of most people who are similar to us, what is extreme is slightly different. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. So I bring that up really. I mean, so I think we're going to probably just have this discussion about faith and the meaning crisis ourselves. But I wonder. I just thought it was probably worth mentioning. I would. So it hasn't gone up on the YouTube channel. So Unheard, they have a bunch of stuff where it's like they present these things in their own club. They've got their own sort of special club in Westminster, no less.
Yeah, again,
the belly of the beast, really. And
summing up the crowd that we may have been hanging out with.
Yeah, although a very friendly crowd.
Very friendly.
I mean, I must say. I mean, we had a very lovely experience of going there. Yeah. Yeah, it's worth going on there. You know, I think there's some great stuff on there, and most of the debates are split up into, you know, political and spiritual and maybe culture. I think maybe the other one. So it's easy to skip the ones that you don't want. But I imagine that the vast majority of people listening would probably refuse to listen to any of it out of pure principle of just this would be completely out of their wheelhouse, and that's not necessarily the wrong attitude or not. It's not my attitude, I must say.
Yeah, I know. I think one day we should probably have, well, it leaks into things, but that kind of idea of hearing from people whose opinions aren't the same as yours and what the value and worth is in that. Because I feel like we do a lot of that. So because we do a lot of that, I feel like we're always surrounded by people maybe slightly to the, you know, other side.
Maybe, but my experience hasn't been that, actually. And I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus here, but my experience has generally been that if you bring any of this stuff up with people in a sort of private setting, I don't mean, you know, I just mean, you know, if you have a conversation, you bring people up, you know, this sort of thing up. Yeah. And again, we aren't well read in alternative right wing opinion or anything, but most people seem to have dabbled in finding out the opinions of the other side, even though you would think that they would absolutely not have. If you look at this is another social media thing. It's the difference between what we actually do and what we say we do, which is a whole nother conversation. Exactly.
So maybe one day we'll have that kind of conversation, because it does keep coming up, and like you say, I think deep down everyone's feeling that way, but it's what we're supposed to outwardly conform to.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah.
But
for now, I just want to acknowledge the fact that we have spent the last couple of weeks doing a load of things which are quite problematic, and all of which have enriched my life and given me a sense of wonder and awe, and I'd recommend it. That's what I'm saying. You know,
we're going to go balance it out with take silence with some Buddhist monks.
Not before we go and see a transphobe. So
with boobs. Anyway.
Oh, he does still have boobs as well. It's going to be quite an interesting little experience. Anyway, so that's just to acknowledge that. But but one thing I would say again, it's not really giving anyone any money or any support, so it's just between you and your eyes and ears. If you want to go and watch this thing when it goes up on YouTube, which I imagine it might even be up by the time the podcast comes out. I think they go up pretty quick, and I would really recommend it because it was fantastic. It was really good.
It's a good little...
someone right in front of us did ask a question, and there was a camera, so you might say, I mean, this is the thing, we might be outed by someone anyway. You know, if any of our friends will secretly watch the Unheard Club, and then they were sitting there watching it, and then all there's Dave and Siobhan sat in the third row. It's perfectly possible. So you might see us on there, might not. Who knows? We haven't seen it, and as a result of not being able to watch it again, I don't really remember that much of it. So
everything to talk about.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that you do. So faith and the meaning crisis.
Yeah.
Let's start with a quick description of what the meaning crisis is. Because this is very much a John Vervaeke idea. It's something we've I don't know if we've ever really called it that, but I think it's more or less what this podcast is about, fundamentally.
It's kind of following on from what I was talking about earlier, is that everyone's feeling, whether they can name it or not, and probably specifically because we can't name it, this feeling of emptiness, this feeling of there are more lonely people than ever before, there's a higher mental health crisis than ever before. And everyone kind of knows that for some reason something feels lacking. We're longing a lot more, and we're getting a lot less fulfillment. And unless we sit and dig as to why, it just continues being this crisis sort of feeling. And so, as we mentioned, John Vervaeke did this 50 hours worth of lecture series about what the meaning crisis is. He kind of tried to sum it up really briefly, although again 50 hours into a minute is hard. But the thing he picked up on, just so you know, the lecture series kind of looks at the history of philosophy and thought to try and work out what meaning is, and then the second half is about cognitively how we experience meaning and then joining the two together. We've not really reached the end, but the thing he picked up on was our way of knowing, and he says that there are 4 ways of knowing, but our entire world at the minute is catered towards one way, and it's what we lose through not having the other 3. I'm not going to remember them all, they all begin with P, but one is the one that we have is the facts. Propositional knowing, I think, is what it's called, and it's about how we know things because we're told them. But that's not knowing. Well, that's one way of knowing. That's what science has done. We know things because science tells us these things. But he said there's loads of other ways of knowing, and he does his lovely hand gestures pointing up to the sky and pointing to all around. But some of the things he says is, it's the physically doing of things by touching, by being in touch with something. And do you hear what I'm saying? In touch, because it means literally grappling with something, and knowing it's real because you're connected to it.
Yeah, he's talking there about, I think, the meaning of words. He does a lot of things where he picks words apart because all words are metaphors for things. So we, again, in our subconscious knows this, but we don't. So we're continuously using words which mean so much, and we know that they mean what they mean, if that makes sense. But
they're metaphors.
They're metaphors for some sort of feeling, and they don't fully encapsulate what that is, or feeling, or doing, or whatever. Like some aspect of our life is encapsulated by just a little word made up of however many letters, and that doesn't actually encapsulate the whole of the experience of whatever that word is describing.
That's totally it. So that's why propositional knowing can't be the whole thing. Absolutely can't remember all the other ones, so not a very good start, but there's tons of other ways. So that kind of being in touch, so physically you don't just know something because you're told it, but like actually being apart with it, like knowing something because it only exists because you see it or you interact with it, that sort of knowing. There's kind of a transcendence kind of knowing as well, like aiming for something. And there's I'm going to forget them all.
Well, I think that's where, and that is where faith kind of comes into this. So the idea of the discussion was about whether faith, whatever faith means, we sort of get to that, I suppose, whether that can help out with the meaning crisis. And I think ultimately, I mean, there wasn't an answer. They didn't finish and say, we've got the answer to this question. But I mean, fundamentally, and I suppose it goes without saying, almost by questioning the debate in that way, that yes, of course, faith in something is the answer to the meaning crisis. Now, for Elizabeth Oldfield and people of a Christian tradition or any religious tradition, that faith, well, she did a good job of answering about this, actually, as I recall. Was that obviously there's faith literally within a religion, faith within God or faith within whatever God it is that you happen to have chosen to put your faith in. But the faith is actually a bit more complicated than that. And it's not it's not purely a religious concept, right? We all put faith into different things. So, and a lot of that goes back to what you were talking about. A lot of the faith that a lot of what we put faith into is currently science, but you could be putting that faith into the other three perspectives.
Yeah.
And they touched quite a lot on AI. And so going back again to what you were saying about, so John Vervaeke was talking about that type of intelligence, that type of knowing, which is the exact type of intelligence and type of knowing which AI is going to have.
Yeah.
And they made a really interesting point, which I think maybe would be worth us discussing, is that this idea that, I think I took this right, this is more or less what they said, but if not, this is certainly what I agree with this, is that in the very near future, that type of knowing is just not going to be necessary anymore. We don't need to know facts anymore because AI will know them for us.
Yeah.
I mean, even now, we don't need to know facts because you can just Google them or whatever. And I think it's fair to say, and I don't even say this is a negative thing, although it certainly could be a negative thing. We have already lost a lot of things that we once would have memorized.
Yep.
An obvious one being phone numbers. No one knows anyone's phone number anymore because they've got a tool which just holds it all for them. Yeah. And that's no bad thing. And you could definitely argue, well, that frees up a lot of space in your brain, or a little bit of space in your brain. But over the course of lots of different things, it frees up a lot of space in your brain. But I suppose then again, it depends what you fill that space with. If you just fill it with reality TV shows, then you might as well have kept the phone numbers in there. But yeah, so, and in that context, so once AI kind of gets rid of any need for us to have that kind of, there will be no need to remember loads of facts, and there already isn't any need, and no one will be very impressed with you if you can just state a load of facts, because that's exactly what AI can do. So if you're going to have a conversation with an AI, that's what you're having a conversation with, that type of knowing. The knowing that is just everything. Yeah,
just facts.
So if AI can do that, then what's the point of a human? Why engage with other humans if the only important aspect of intelligence is knowing facts? Then you might as well just spend the rest of your life chatting to an AI. You might as well go into a virtual world. You might as well, So what is it that we gain from talking to another human, from looking at eyes, from being physically across the room from them?
Yeah. Well, from an old science point of view, not even old science, from like an old evolution point, our eyes are specifically where they are so that we can have eye contact with other humans. I've read about this a couple of times in a few books, and it comes up, weirdly, all of this stuff comes up a lot recently, and I think it is that kind of trying to figure out whether we're consciously doing it or not, but all these people are saying the same things, going back to like our old evolutionary brains and why those things are there, and our lovely technology tries to like circumvent these as like, oh, these are terrible old hangovers from when we had to fight off lions, and some of these things are, anxiety sucks, but it is there for a reason. But the eyes are really interesting because our eyes are specifically where they are for no other reason than to communicate with other humans. And it's been thought of as we really need that as humans. Other animals, loads of other animals have them on the side of their head because their main focus is, they need to be alert, they need to be able to see prey, or see predators finding them. But ours are specifically, to other animals, if they were conscious and could look at us, they'd be like, that's a dumb place for eyes to be. It's they're not useful for anything. But that's because, humans have been evolved for years and years and years so that we do have this eye contact, and it is really important. And there's lots of positive brain chemicals that happen when we have eye contact with people. We need it. If we don't, I'm not going to recall any scientific experiments off the top of my head, but there's been many to determine that we need this sort of connection.
Can I just say, to read the science thing though, so this is kind of the exact point, I think, of this whole debate and discussion, is that so science can tell you that as a result of evolution, your eyes are in this place for this reason, right? And it can pick apart the eye, and it can tell you every single little aspect that's going on in the eye. It can tell you how light goes in. It can tell you everything about your eye, but it cannot tell you why. It cannot, and nor can words, really.
Well, the word ineffable comes up all the bloody time with this sort of stuff, isn't it? Because it's exactly it. It's that feeling that you can't put into words, that comes up over and over again, that we're desperate to try and put into words because we're brought up in a scientific world where we have to name everything. But naming everything doesn't tell you anything other than what it is or what we think it is at that moment in time. But it's always this ineffable thing that we can't quite put into words, like this feeling of it. Like the opposite is the feeling of emptiness and loneliness that we all can keep feeling that we have, that's in the culture right now. But yeah, that reason that we need to see into someone's eyes, we can't describe why we need that. And John Vervaeke mentioned it, and it's been brought up loads of times. Like, we're missing that now in our culture. Like, we're actively taught that's a bad thing because everyone's like looking away from each other, looking at their phones. People aren't looking at each other anymore, and we're losing that ability to do that because now that's kind of anxiety inducing to have face-to-face conversations. People don't phone each other anymore. You see a phone number ring and you go, oh, if it's important, they'll leave a message.
I think it's worse than that. I mean, I think that when people look into their phones, they see themselves. So they're constantly looking into their own eyes.
Yeah.
And that's weird because most modern technology, most communicative modern technology involves at least an element of you seeing yourself, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So there's always a little picture of you in the corner so you can make sure you've not got a double chin or whatever.
And most people are just staring at that anyway.
Of course, because they're bothered about whether they've got a double chin or not. If you have a conversation with someone in real life, you probably aren't thinking about whether you've got a you've got or not.
No, you're spending time. But even...
Because you're engaged in a more fruitful way, but not. You might be saying the exact same words. The exact same thing might be happening, but you're engaged in a much more full way. Yeah. I think.
But it's also things you can't quite word as well. We've said that already, but like, because you've got that eye contact, you've got that, you're learning someone's non-verbal cues that you don't get quite via looking at someone through a screen. And like you say, if you're not even looking at them because you're looking at yourself, then that's definitely not, you're not going to see it that way. But there's so much from like communicating in real life that we can't quite word, but we don't have to, because evolution's been learning that for us for years and years and years to try and work out. Like, someone can say something in two different ways, only changing their voice ever so subtly, but their non-verbal cues could let you know, that they mean something entirely different. One could be threatening and one could be loving. They could be saying the same thing in a similar way, but something about their demeanour lets you know that this is a threat and not being nice. I don't know. I'm not
totally.
It well,
I mean, I don't know. The word hello can mean millions of different things, but it's not just about. So one of the most obvious, the way that unquestionably everyone will know exactly what I'm talking about. One of the most unquestionable versions, this is in a negative context, is that if someone has no idea about personal space. Yeah. So someone that stands slightly closer to you than is comfortable. Yeah. And we all know exactly what distance it is that we should stand from each other. Yeah. And it's not actually the same distance for different people. Yeah. And I don't just mean like, I stand close to my wife. I don't mean different people in that way. I mean, literally, if you're meeting people the first time, different people are comfortable with you being closer or further away from them, and you have no idea about that. You have no cognitive idea about that, but you know that, and you naturally do it, and
you work it out, all the time.
And it's you only notice when someone gets it wrong, when someone doesn't have whatever that thing is. And so then again, if it's the difference between someone saying hello and being the appropriate length away from you, and hello and being literally 1 millimeter closer to you. It's a completely different experience. And that's in a negative way, but obviously there's loads of positive equivalents, I think. Yeah. So how does that work with faith, though? So we've gone off on a slight tangent, but I think that there is some sort of element, and it's going to be very hard for me to put this in words, partly because I don't think I'm clever enough. I think I've got an idea, but I don't know if I've got the words to really get the idea across, which of course is perfect for a podcast like this one. Is that those ineffable things, whether they be tiny things or massive things, it's the fact that there is an ineffable thing. Yeah. So we're so used to talking about everything in cold, hard facts that are provable by science. We do this all the time, both in our lives and on this podcast. Yep. All the time we say, there's some scientific experiment that's proved this. Yeah. Or there's a social experiment that's proved this. It's shown that, for example, we've just talked about the loneliness crisis like it's a fact. And I think it is a fact. But I can only really say that I think it is a fact because of my own experience of life.
Yeah,
so I can prove it with figures.
Yeah.
I can say this sociologist did this in 20 years ago and then did it again 2 years ago, and they found that 50% more people said that they were lonely than had said 20 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
But that isn't actually proof of a thing as such. It's suggestive and it's important. And science is. We've had this discussion before. Science is very important, but it's not the whole story.
And it's not the feeling of loneliness.
No,
like you're describing it.
The map is not the territory.
But yeah, it's you can describe it all day long, but that feeling that you have, you can never describe entirely. It's like, oh God, isn't that thing where everyone describes an elephant? They blindfold themselves and they're all touching an elephant, but some people are saying, oh, this is a leather handbag. Oh, this is a tree. You're all describing the thing with words, but no one's describing the thing.
Yeah.
And
well,
like
and also they're only getting
they're
getting a bit of the thing, so they think
Exactly.
the trunk is a snake, or they think that whatever.
Exactly.
But I think that is sort of what faith is. Because faith, fundamentally, taken out of a religious context, but maybe we will probably put it into a religious context too, but for now, outside of a religious context, faith is just all of those things that we know but we don't have proof for. And often the proof that we have for things, like is very similar to the loneliness epidemic proof. It's not proof, it's not absolute proof. It doesn't tell you absolutely the fact. It just gives you an idea, and somebody's done an experiment, and probably someone else has done another experiment and proved the opposite as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Particularly with those sort of social experiments and stuff, it's obviously a bit of a crapshoot.
Yeah.
But I think that's what faith is.
Yeah.
It's the thing. It's believing in something which you can't prove.
Yeah.
And I think that we've lost. I think one of the things that we've lost is that we're continuously trying to prove things.
Yeah.
I think this is a bad example, but I do sort of think it's right. It's similar to how we expect people in power to be able to just sort things out. And and the most obvious example of this to me was that when COVID happened, there was this sort of idea almost that it was just like, well, the scientists and the government, however little faith you might have had in whatever government you happen to be living under at the time, should just be able to sort this out. Why are we stuck in our homes? They should just be able to sort it out.
Yeah.
Why can't I go out to the pub? They need to be able to sort it out. But it's like, we all knew that COVID was this completely unknown thing and it was utter chaos.
Yeah.
The problem is that because of the way that our society works, the government had to also act as if they were just going to sort it out.
Yeah.
They couldn't say, do you know what, guys? We've got no fucking idea about this. No one knows anything about this thing. We have no idea what to do. We're just guessing. We think this is the best possible option, but this might be wrong. And the problem is it turns it into a narrative. I'm going off on a piece now about COVID, but it turns it into a narrative that we've now got to, which is kind of people with all these conspiracy theories on both sides of this. Obviously, there was loads of conspiracy theories on one side for a long time, but now it's just everyone has more or less thinks in conspiratorial terms about something which was just chaos.
Yeah.
But we can't imagine something where we just accept, oh, do you know what? No idea.
Yeah.
This is just chaos.
And there's something about, if we lose our connections with each other on a very individual, like one-on-one basis, how that expands to everything. So I know you're a human being, and I know that you can fuck up and you can have no idea all the time. I know that because I am also that person. I can fuck up and have no idea all the time. But because we're so far removed from just people around us, when it comes to as far as politicians and scientists and government people, we're so disconnected from people around us that, like, the last thing we're going to remember is that person is also a human being who is fallible, who is likely to make incorrect choices, who sometimes won't know. We forget,
or who might make a really stupid joke when they're really pissed, like Phil Anselmo.
Oh, stop it! Don't bring that up. But it's just we forget the human in everyone, because being human is this. We can science it all day long and decide what a human is and describe it in as many terms as we can, but it doesn't fully encapsulate what it actually is to be human. And the same for other animals and the same for other things. We can never know what it is to be them. John Vervaeke calls this structural something formation, and he's got a word for it, and I absolutely can't remember it. I'm reading a book at the minute which describes it as an Umwelt, which is like a German term for it, and it's the reality as it is for that person. And we can never know everyone else's, and we can never know any other animals, and we can never know anything of this. But we're forgetting that everyone is a human. There is something about it that we are connected to. We know that they can be infallible. They can be fallible. We just don't give each other any kind of grace. We just think, no, you must know things. You must know things. I can't.
But so what does encourage us to do that ultimately goes to the other point of faith, which is religion. So if you have faith in a specific religion, that religion will teach you exactly that.
Yeah.
And will encourage you to do exactly that, and will give you kind of tools almost, or maybe not even tools, but almost like an excuse. Like forgiveness, we talked about this before, forgiveness isn't very popular in 2025. But of course, if you have a religious tradition to fall back on, and you have faith in that religious tradition, not that that's really got anything to do with forgiveness, it's got to do with whether you believe in a man in the sky or whatever it is you happen to believe in, it allows you to say, yes, Phil Anselmo did do a Hitler salute when he was pissed once, and claimed that it was because he was drinking white wine that he shouted white power, but I forgive him.
I feel like you've got an agenda behind this podcast.
No, I haven't. I haven't. I'm just trying to make everything fit together. I'm just trying to make it sound like we've sort of planned this in some way. But I think that's quite interesting. And so another aspect, maybe the final aspect of what they discussed in this debate, which I think is probably ultimately where we need to go, is that. So that in mind, let's just say that people agree with me on what I just said there. Let's just say that, and let's just take Christianity because Elizabeth Oldfield is a Christian, so that was her perspective. John Vervaeke isn't religious at all. So, well, he's Buddhist, I think, but or maybe not a Buddhist, but he practices Buddhism. A lot of Buddhist practice. Yeah. So let's just say, I'm not saying everyone would agree with this, but let's just say that we're in agreement that, basically speaking, the Christian message is a good one. It gives you a bunch of tools that you can use in order to kind of get past something like the meaning crisis. It gives you faith in something. It gives you a community. It gives you all of the things that we're lacking in the modern world. It makes you feel small. It gives you something bigger than yourself to concentrate on. So you become less sort of self-obsessed. All of these things that I think ultimately this is kind of one of the arguments for what we're losing. Probably an argument that we've made about what we're losing by not having religion in the world anymore. So they talked about this in the context of cultural Christianity. So Richard Dawkins, probably the main new atheist of the early 2000s, and obviously writer of The God Delusion and probably the most famous atheist in the world, who also I think has a bunch of problematic opinions. He's come out quite recently, apparently, and said that he's a cultural Christian. And they would discuss that a little bit, and they were talking about the fact that
they don't like that term.
They don't like that term, but let's try and say what that term is, because to my understanding, and I think I'm right, it's more or less what I've just described. It's taking on all of the positive bits of religion, but saying, but I don't obviously believe in the woo-woo.
The woo-woo. They actually called it woo as well.
They did call it woo, I think. So I'm ignoring the bit of religion which is faith. I'm not doing that bit. I've got no faith in anything.
Jesus, no God in the sky.
Yeah, but I can accept that our society was built on the principles of Christianity, largely, particularly in the Western world.
Nice to each
other. And that the rules generally were in place for a good reason, that they did mostly good for people over the course of time, and they were perverted by some and caused wars and whatever.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this is a good moral compass that we can live by, and also has some kind of snazzy things. Apparently, Richard Dawkins likes going to Evensong. I don't really even know what Evensong is, but it's some sort of singing, I assume, in a Christian church. And so their argument, or I think John Vervaeke was much more so, was basically this was awful.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm worried. When I heard him, I was a bit worried. I thought to myself,
of course,
is that what we are?
Yeah.
Is that and maybe that is, I don't know. Maybe that's what we've been talking about for the last however many episodes of the podcast since we got into all of this non-woo-woo. because I think I agreed with him, although I don't know what to do with my agreement. I mean, he basically said the problem with it is that by doing that, you lose the actual important aspect of religion, which is the faith aspect of it. It is the kind of giving yourself over to something else. So you're kind of play acting a bunch of rules because you think they're going to do good for you. Yeah. They're going to improve your life, but without any of the sort of sacrifice, I suppose. Yeah. Sacrifice with a small s. Not that sacrifice needs a big S, but you get my point. Yeah. And I think I would agree, because I think the problem is with cultural Christianity, or cultural any religion, is that it fits very much alongside what I see as being the problem in our society generally, which is that we're all play acting at things. Yeah. So it feels to me like most people are just sort of dressing up and saying they're not. Okay, I'm going to use punk as an example because it's an ideal one, and this isn't really aimed at any one person. I'm certainly not talking about every single person that listens to punk when I say this, but generally speaking, I've seen a trend over the course of time that went from people that were punk was very serious business for them. It was a huge part of their lives, and it influenced their politics and their philosophy on life and the way that they communicate with people and the things that they did outside of the punk scene. And don't get me wrong, there was always an element of this anyway, but it seems to me, having been in it for so long, that in more recent times it's a bunch of people dressing up in a certain way and saying the 10 opinions that they're supposed to say when they're on social media, but actually in real life just kind of getting together and getting pissed. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not judging anyone for getting together and getting pissed. But it feels like a sort of, like a play acting version of something that was once real. And I think that it's kind of the cosplay. It's the cosplay generation, maybe, definitely. Or the normalization of this. It's like if you appear to be doing something and you appear to be a thing, that's the important thing, not the actual doing of it. And I think that, we don't need to keep bashing social media, but I'm sure we will. But hugely, social media is to blame for that. It's like if you can get the Instagram picture where you look like the punk,
then you've done it.
Then you're the punk, right? But that doesn't involve any of the actual useful bits. And I'm not talking about. So obviously, like, really liking music is an incredible experience. It'll fulfill your life with awe and all those things.
We have a problem when things aren't real, I think.
But you can't put your finger. The other thing is, of course, I can't turn around to any single person and say, what you're doing isn't real, because I mean that's not my place. I mean I become the guy chasing the girl down the street saying how many Ramones songs, and I'm very aware of that.
Well, I think John Vervaeke mentioned it a bit, because there is something in this, what you're saying about that, we only care what we appear to be, and we're not really caring about the gubbin behind it. And so cultural Christianity and ignoring the God and the Jesus behind it is kind of almost the same as that. It's fulfilling our own identity issues and our own, like, immediate issues rather than the bigger pictures. He mentioned it with regards to AI and ChatGPT and all that sort of stuff. And he said, eventually what happens when we program ChatGPT to give us the teachings of Jesus and then becomes more Jesus-y than Jesus. Yeah. And then people decide, well, that's, while I know it's not real, I prefer that one. I know someone who's programmed ChatGPT to give them the opinions blended between a particular philosopher, Buddha, and someone else. And they think it's fascinating. I'm just like, but that doesn't seem good to me. That seems very unreal. And I think there's something...
it feels empty as well. And I don't know if everyone would have that reaction, but to me, when you told me about that, we had this conversation. It was just like, well, I can't explain why, but there's something not right. There's something wrong about that. There's something missing, maybe missing. Whereas, of course, I don't think there's anything missing from more or less guessing what Jesus might have said.
And and it's. I think maybe this is coming up more and more because we're in a world where you were watching something that Paul Kingsnorth was saying the other day, because he's a writer who we mentioned it before. He was in Extinction Rebellion, wrote some fiction, and is now writing a lot of essays about. He's become Christian, and he's kind of many concerns about the current culture and the current world and how we can claw it back. And he's become Christian, and that seems to be doing the thing for him. he's against.
I feel
the
at this
machine.
point we need to acknowledge not problematic.
Not problematic.
I'm gonna just say whenever we talk about
Nice
anybody now,
guy.
I'm gonna bring up whether people are problematic or not.
Nice guy.
I never thought I'd get to this point in my life.
And he talks a lot about how the reason that humankind are so, in his opinion, that humankind is so obsessed with AI at the minute is because he thinks that instead of, because we've lost religion and because we don't have a faith in a God, we'd rather be gods. And he says AI is the ultimate, because what is God? God is a creator. He created humankind in a Christian opinion. But nowadays, whilst we, humankind might not be the bulk opinion, definitely within the people who are creating AI, they fulfill all of that. Like, they are creators of a new species that they want to shape, but they also want to be like, but it can't be better than, it needs to better our lives. And they're kind of, some people are saying like, we're knowingly making the species that are going to out involve us, but we kind of want to hitch a ride on that and not let them completely take over. Maybe we can meld with them, and everyone's looking at this like long life situation. But it's about how there's still something not very real about that. There's something still really, if AI comes along and is the next thing, and we can only program it to be whatever we are. I don't know how it will surpass us. It can surpass us with being, more able to provide facts very quickly, or more able to do, someone's saying AI can look at a scan of someone and predict cancer long before it's even existed. That's a brilliant use of AI. That's what we should be using it for. But someone said, okay, well, what happens when we program little AI bots to be our doctors, and they have to go and tell someone their family member's dying or you're about to die? There's something really, I fucking don't want to be told that by a robot. Even if it's a human with the worst bedside manner, I want the human every time.
Yeah, ironically, you were told about your uncle fundamentally by a robot.
Yeah, I know. True,
anyway.
True. No, well, this is, going back to the poor communication.
See, I told you we planned this.
Hey, but there is something about it. But can you say why? No, both of them are going to tell you the exact same information. And even the person with the worst bedside manner, social skills, I would still take that over. There's something different, and no one can say what that is about the robot and a real life person delivering that information. Or there's no why for a robot. There is no why other than it exists to provide information. But it's not going to, it can't make it can make choices based on working out all of the best criteria and the best information, but it can't make a moral choice, because that's an argument, I guess.
But the other thing is, where does moral come from?
Exactly, and maybe moral's not the right thing.
But you touch on, so it felt to me a little bit there like you were going off piece. Not that I haven't throughout this conversation too, but actually that's exactly the point, isn't it? So where do we get our morals from? And in the Western world, fundamentally, we get our morals from religion, from Christianity.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what you're actually talking about, without knowing it and without meaning to, and not because I'm accusing you of being a Christian or anything, but what you're talking about here is fundamentally a bunch of things that are based on cultural Christianity.
Yeah.
And so the thing that AI makes you feel so icky about, and I should imagine makes a lot of people feel so icky about, is actually because we're all rooted in the thing that we no longer say that we have any faith in.
Yeah.
Because of the woo, maybe. So maybe therefore cultural Christianity maybe is the one. I don't know.
It's really tough. Because I think you're right. When John Vervaeke was like so angry about the idea of cultural Christianity, he's not Christian. Like Elizabeth Oldfield, when she was not up for it, I could understand. You can understand, because it's like, oh, you're bastardizing the thing I truly believe in. But John Vervaeke, who does not believe in a god and all of this thing, still had the same offence. And it was interesting, because when he then described what cultural Christianity was, I thought, shit, like you say, is that what we're doing? What is the difference between doing all the positive things that Christianity and religion, because it's not just Christianity, but all religions have practices that or like ideas or lessons.
Well, as we've said before, they all overlap. They all end up being the same
sort of message.
Really.
Yeah. So what is that difference practically, or really, between doing all of the good but not necessarily believing that in the divine, as it were.
Mm.
And it is hard because I didn't think I was on the bad side until then, and now I'm like,
so
okay,
you're problematic now.
Maybe I'm problematic in the eyes of John Favaki, who I would never want to be thought of as problematic by. But it's just interesting because it's just, what is that difference? Why? And so this is where like a leap of faith comes in, isn't it? Because it's just like, I'm not only going to not believe in something, but if I'm going to believe in it, I have to like kind of overcome everything I'm taught about what is real and how do I prove it's real. And it's like, you have to kind of like jump over all of that to then decide.
Well, that's a very Western problem,
actually.
So the thing is, so in Islam, for example, ultimately what I'm not diminishing anybody in Islam's faith by any means, and I'm sure there's changeable levels, but what you're ultimately doing is you're taught a bunch of practices. You have to do something 5 times a day.
Yeah.
You have to fast at certain times. You have certain days where you do things, and the kind of almost the ultimately when you do your religion within Islam, it's a bunch of exercises.
Yeah.
Which are both, obviously they are religious, but they're also social, and they're also but they also sort of give your life. They give your life purpose, I'm sure, but ultimately they give your life a kind of pattern.
Yeah.
Now, whereas within Christianity, that's not the case. So within Christianity, I mean, obviously there are certain things, and like you go to church on Sunday, I suppose, but ultimately it's not really, it's much looser.
Yeah,
that's the big difference between Christianity and pretty much all other religions. Not Hinduism, because that's a whole other crazy mess.
Load of woo.
Yeah.
No.
But a fantastic crazy mess.
That's the fun. That's the fun.
Yeah.
That's the fun one.
But yeah, and I think that's quite interesting because it's quite a Western problem, because it's like because one of my I might have said this before, but one of my thoughts, I can't bring myself to, in a way I'm someone probably ultimately, I don't know if this is entirely true, but certainly at times I'm someone that would love to be able to believe in something, but I can't bring myself to believe really in anything. But ultimately, I think Elizabeth Oldfield said this, but I've only heard this a lot. To be in that sort of position, in fact, I think this is a Paul Kingsnorth thing, is that ultimately, if you're in that position, what you need to do is just pretend you believe, and then what will happen? Yeah, what will happen is that you'll suddenly, in their view, if you're a Christian, well, therefore you'll end up believing.
Yeah. God will expose himself to you. That sounds awful.
No, problematic.
He'll come to you, but I won't do that either.
But I can't bring myself to do that either. But ultimately, that you're exactly right. It's reality tunnels, isn't it? So ultimately, you all the way back to the start of, I think, the first episode we ever did under the name Sober. You are who you pretend to be.
Yeah.
Well, so you just pretend to be the thing that you want to be. But religion seems different to that, why does religion seem so? I can pretend to be anything that I want. So I think that works in so many different ways. So you can say, I am going to pretend to be really outgoing and really confident, and if you do it for a little while, you might not hit the peaks of some, but you will become more confident because you're pretending to be more confident, and then you become you give and take. You give something and you get a different reaction back, and we've talked about that. And I could more or less do that with most things. When I was going to sing in a band and I felt really scared about the idea of just singing in a band, I was just like, well, I've fucking signed up for it now, so I'm just going to have to pretend. I'm pretending to be a singer now. Yeah. And then now it's normal. It's just completely normal. And some people think that's insane that you can do that, Yeah. But here's the one thing that I can't pretend to be: religious. Now, is that because it's just woo-woo and it's nonsense and we should just ignore it? Or is that because it's the ultimate big thing? You can't pretend to be religious because it's like the ultimate thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can pretend to be anything and it will come true, but I wouldn't feel comfortable. It almost feels like I would be the AI in that situation, pretending to be a human. And
also you feel like there's something about, we're all willing to feel small. And, well, not all willing, but say, for example, I'll only speak for myself. I love the feeling of feeling really small and knowing that I am a tiny, 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 unimportant piece of matter in this period of time. And
same height as Glenn Danzig.
but I am the same height as Glenn Danzig, so that's very important. But there's a way that you could go nihilistic as fuck and just have a horrible time with that, and existential and whatever you, or you can be like, isn't that amazing? Just be in the present moment because none of this matters. But there's something, it's like a loss of agency almost, which is silly, but to think on one hand, really small, non-important, doesn't matter. If you decide against your rational, and only rational in this, because again, rational is somewhat contextual, because some people would say it's very rational to just give over and believe in a different thing, and you could argue for that. But just to go, I now abandon my thought of there being no, higher being than myself, even though rationally I'm very willing to believe that I'm very small and unimportant and tiny. But it is like this loss of agency in a way to say I'm so small and like tiny that it's possible that someone else kind of created this, and that I have to give myself over to that rather than just have agency of my own life. There's just something weird. There's also a difference in, and this is where Christianity and Buddhism, why I feel much more connected to one than the other, and I think this is the whole crux of it. It's not the stories. I can handle, because something I've come to realize is stories are stories, and you can call it myth, and you can learn something from all of these, and that's how I would see it. So whether I genuinely believe that Jesus died on a cross in the way that he did and came back to life, there are Christians who
I think historically he definitely did die on a cross.
Yeah, but whether he then came back to life and rolled back that massive stone from being in a cave, there are Christians that will say, oh no, that's a bona fide fact, and that's where I struggle. But I can accept that as a story. That's fine. Myths are both less than truth and more than truth. Yeah, exactly. It's what you learn from it, and parables and learning something great from that. But I guess, and I can accept that on both sides. I guess the difficulty for me, and I wonder if this is where people struggle, is, do I believe there's one great creator in the world, that created us? Is there something divine like that? That's one way of looking at it, and that'd be the Christian way. Or is there like an energy of this world that is perpetual, cyclical, that we tap into for a tiny little bit consciously, that's always there? And that's probably where the Buddhist line could go. Or do I believe in none of those things?
Are those two things the exact same thing, but just told through different stories?
Oh, well, that's the other thing. But I guess when it's presented as one, I really struggle with that. And I think this is where religion gets difficult. And this is where I can see cultural Christianity. I can see why it exists, because isn't Christianity wonderful? Isn't everything about this? Isn't even someone called Jesus coming around and telling all these really good stories about being nice to each other? Isn't that brilliant? Everything up until great man in the sky who actually made all this happen is the difficult bit, I think. And Buddhism doesn't deal with that because it doesn't believe in a god. It just believes in, again.
Some does, but yeah.
Yeah, well, but again,
whether it's
when you go down the like bodhisattva routes, and you go down the, Buddha was a person who, and that story happened,
But in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a lot of woo.
Yeah, well, Tibetan Buddhism, a ton of that is way before. Yeah, okay, there's a lot of woo. But this is where you go from Theravada to all of the others as well. So and there's just tons. But I guess I can see the purpose in the woo stories for giving some kind of meaning. But whether you, again, reality tunnel wise, whether you then decide to fully go, you know what, I'm just going to fucking headstrong go into this. And then lo and behold, you're meditating and you're visited by some crazy thing with 1,000 arms.
Someone told us that.
And it's like, okay, did that happen? Can I actually understand this as a metaphor for actually that, that thing is the God of compassion. It's visiting me, telling me maybe I need to be more compassionate. Maybe that's a deep down subconscious thing happening to me. That's how I would rationally understand it.
But I suppose the
people
point
don't
is,
tell it.
But also the point is not to rationalize.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's the problem. That comes back to what we were talking about in a loose way, in the context of like putting science on everything.
Yeah.
The point of
knowing
faith,
only facts rather than.
Yeah, the point of faith is that you don't rationalize anything.
Yeah.
And there's something, and I can see that therefore it's just, you could just say, well, therefore it's nonsense. If you can't, if there's no rational, but we don't live in a rational world. No. We don't live in a thing. We don't live purely in science. We do live in science, but we also live in something. This is what we were talking about earlier. Something beyond science that we can't quite put our fingers on. And I suppose so. Ultimately, I think my thinking on this, although I still don't think I'll ever act on what this probably would suggest I act on. But my feeling on this is that all of these things are just the same. They're different stories to describe the same thing.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to call God or some higher thing, it's just ultimately the thing you don't understand.
Yeah.
It's just the thing that is ineffable to you. It's we're the dog with 100 words. We talked about this before. Like, the dog understands fetch, but that doesn't mean that he understands the meaning of why he's a dog. And we are the dog in this context. We know a lot more than the dog, but we don't know. There's loads more to know that we couldn't possibly know, I'm sure, but we don't know it. So we got no. Anyway, so if you look at it in that context, so if what people call God or what people call a higher power or whatever is just the thing we don't know about, then what happens is, I think, is that individual religions then just become stories about that thing, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. The problem is that they're often presented in these really kind of hard and fast ways. So, Jesus existed. Jesus came back from the dead. God was the Father. Jesus was God.
They told us facts because that's our way of knowing.
Yeah, but I don't think they are actually. No. I think probably if you talked, I don't know if people would really view it this way, but I think that probably most religious people accept them as stories. It's not quite. We presume a lot about other people, I think. So ultimately, though, if you're gonna, if you accepted that, if we accepted there is something ineffable that we don't understand, and giving ourselves over to it in some way is a positive step because it does all of those positive things. It gives us a community. It takes away the emptiness. All that sort of stuff. Then ultimately, the one you pick is just going to be the one that is culturally most comfortable to you.
Yep.
So we happen to have been brought up in a Christian country. I said the Lord's Prayer when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. So by default, when we often talk about religion, without even knowing it, we don't talk about religion. We just talk about Christianity because that's just the one that's kind of in our ether.
Yeah.
Whereas if we'd grown up in, the Middle East, then it would be Islam or whatever. Yeah. So you kind of do the one that's most comfortable to you, I suppose, if you're going to do it. But again, I don't. But in order to do even that, so I think that's quite a sensible way of looking at it. But for me to do that, I don't think I could take that step.
It's hard, isn't it? I think it's because it's just really hard. Like also rational is a funny term to say because rational is just what makes sense because of whatever, I don't know, evidence you have, whatever makes sense. And again, we're still only saying that in as far as facts. If you have a feeling or if you have something you can't quite put your finger on, that you can still make a rational decision based on that. So it is still, for a lot of people who have had these experiences or feel inclined that way, religion is rational to them because it makes sense because of whatever they feel that they have experienced and whatever, you know what I mean? So even saying like believing in a God doesn't feel rational. It's just that it doesn't feel rational to us right now with our current circumstances. It's not to say that people who are religious aren't rational people. They definitely are.
Well, rationality changes over time as well, doesn't it? So it wasn't very long ago that something like 95% of everybody in the world believed in God.
Yeah.
So, being an atheist was a very unusual thing for the vast majority of history. It's only very recently that it's not been. But it also, like you say, it changes from person to person. So what is rational to you and what is rational to me is completely different.
And I think also we've been brought up in a world when maybe it's specifically our kind of ages, but I don't know. I just assumed I was atheist for ages because I wasn't taught anything different. I was just taught Christianity and atheism and nothing really in between. And the spirituality has just been like abandoned in the world that I grew up in. So you either were religious and believed in a God or you were atheist. And I didn't really fully understand that atheism meant not only do I not believe in God, I don't think he exists. And that's really I throw around the word atheism, where I definitely have my entire life, really loosely. But it's actually a really strong opinion. And I think
it means you know.
It means I know that there is no God, and then I just, by default, what's your opinion on people that are religious? Like, that's just the way things have been the entire time I've been brought up. And I always kind of like had this like weird feeling towards that word, because I was just like, well, it doesn't really cover it, but there is no other words. It turns out there's tons of other words, and there's tons of other ways you can think about the world.
Also, you don't need a word for it. I suppose you don't have to be anything.
But I think if you're only brought up with you're religious or you're atheist, you just kind of don't even know that there's something to explore there. And you might have this weird feeling, but you might not attach it to a spiritual yearning in any way if you've just been brought up to believe there are tons of religions and then there are atheists and there's nothing in between, and we're not really going to like go into the details of how that God might be similar to that or anything like that. That's just not the way that I was brought up anyway, and it definitely doesn't seem that the cultural thing. And it's only now, I would say, in the last few years, while people have been going, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel empty? Again, meaning crisis is a way to describe it. That I think people are going back and going, okay, well, actually, do you know what? Maybe it was too strong of me to have said I don't believe in like, maybe there's more to unpick and explore there. And the more stories you hear about people who were like brought up a religion, abandoned it because, you know, you brought up a certain way and then you rebel and then you're like, no, fuck that, I'm not doing that anymore. Very understandable for anyone who's brought up in a very strict religious way, because I imagine that's the last thing you want to do. But then there's tons of people that like I hear stories and stories of people that find their way back to religion, or people that have like dipped into tons and tons of different ones and now they're Christian, or now they're this or now they're that. That's just not the narrative that I was brought up with. I was definitely brought up with, you are religious or you don't believe, or you know there is no God. And everything in between is not discussed.
I think I was brought up in more like, you're atheist or you're fucking mad. To be honest.
Yeah. But that being said, I also went to Sunday school and loved it. And saw a lot of benefit in it. And it's just weird that even as a kid, I was like, oh, it's that woo-woo place I go, but I'm allowed to practice my recorder and they let me make cookies there. And sometimes we do loads of art. But there's loads of like, this is where the cultural Christianity stuff comes in, because there was tons of like,
it was normal, I imagine.
Yeah, it was so normal. Sunday school was where you're kids that live in a village and there's nothing to do, but on a Sunday you can go there and you can do all this other stuff, and it was really nice. But in my brain, you know, the way I was told it was, oh yeah, but the vicars are in the background hoping that you're going to join them. Like, would throw a bit of Jesus in there every now and then. You go, yeah, shut up, I'm just going to make my cookies. And so even then, it's like the good of it was kind of like, you felt like you were getting one over. Like, oh, I'm here, I'm in your club.
Fuck you, vicar, I'm making cookies.
Yeah, I'm not believing your woo-woo. And it's like, even then we didn't really acknowledge the good and the usefulness there. Like, anytime it was like attributed to Christianity, just like, oh no, it's a load of old woo.
But the other thing that stands out to me there, you see, and I'm not judging Lil Siobhan making her cookies, but is the and I suppose this is ultimately true of probably all of us, atheists or agnostic or whatever in the modern world, is that, so you thought you were getting one over the vicars by making your cookies, but fundamentally they were the ones finding loads of meaning in their lives. You were just making cookies and eating them. Yeah. And you thought to yourself, oh, this is brilliant, this life, making cookies and eating them. But actually...
Still do.
Yeah, of course. And there's nothing wrong with making cookies and eating them. Maybe that's the crux of this, is that we've been brought up in this world, and not just us, but, you know, generations of people have been brought up in a world where it's like, you know, going back to this, you know, getting to watch Netflix for a whole day that's brilliant. Yeah. Oh, look at me. I don't have to go to church on a Sunday. I'll just watch this reality TV show. That's brilliant. And those fucking Christians, they're all thick, aren't they? They're all idiots. They're all mad. And maybe they are. And maybe that's all right, what I've just said there. But ultimately, who's that? I don't know. Who's
the stupid one?
Who's the stupid one?
I think that's the other opinion you sometimes hear. People go, oh, I'd love to believe. I'd love all that. And when you get down to why, and again, this cultural Christianity stuff comes up, because they do say all of the like good things, you know, all of the positive stuff that comes from having that community and that connection. But like, people say, oh, I'd love to, you know, to just give myself up and to not have... I think people like the idea of a loss of agency and just to be like, that idea of feeling small and meaningless. I think people actually want that because it's better than being confronted with their life and going, oh God, there is no meaning. Like this is crap. I'd just go and look at Instagram for 5 hours so I don't have to think about it. Whereas people who are religious have gone past that. They've given over and they've gone, no, we are a tiny little thing. We mean nothing. We were made by, well, not that we mean nothing, but I mean, in the Christian world, it was really interesting hearing Elizabeth talk about it because she was just like, we're made in his image. So we need to be respectful and like live up to that in a way. So not just that we're meaningless and we're small, but we're also made in the image of someone far greater than us. So we should be making efforts to be great because don't waste that.
But I think even if you can put that message into a secular, and I don't think you can, but if you could put that message, I think that's a really positive message, right? If you've got this idea that you're trying to live up to someone's expectations, you're going to lead a better life and you're going to therefore have a better life and you're going to enjoy it more.
And when people go, oh, but there's no God, I'm like, okay, so then what are you doing that's better than that? Like, you are watching, like, and you being the proverbial, everyone, we're just watching reruns, we're watching Netflix, we're watching pretend lives, we're giving a pretend life out and we're feeling nothing, we're feeling really lonely and shit, rather than, but yet we're still bashing the Christians and the people of religious faith. They're like, oh, you stupid people with your crappy lives, believe in woo-woo. And you're like, but what are you doing? What are we doing that's better than that? Probably not. And it's just like, there is just something to be said for, I wonder if this is why people are turning more to it, finding, I don't know, like people can't deal with the meaningless of things anymore. And so I don't know, maybe people who are religious have got it right.
We don't know, Siobhan.
I just don't know.
We spent over an hour and a half trying to work this out.
We haven't gotten anywhere.
No, we haven't gotten anywhere. We're now going to go and sit with our own thoughts in silence for 10 days. So, just leave it with us, guys. We might have the answers when we get back.
If you've got the answers, email us at shamcityroosters@gmail.com.
Please, meaning of life only. Meaning of life only, thanks.
In 50 words or less.
30 words or less. I've got a very short attention span from all that Instagram. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time after this retreat, and we will see whether we have any more answers or whether might come back and say the exact opposite of everything we've just said.
We might be visited by someone, we might not.
Who knows? If I meet Jesus, I will let you all know.
You've met Jesus once before.
I was on mushrooms. Doesn't count. Oh, maybe it does count. There you go. But I did also see a cow. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. We might be changed people or we might be exactly the same.
Yeah, who knows?
Who knows?
Have a lovely couple of weeks. Much love. Ciao,
Goodbye.
ciao. Bye.